Towing and water recovery. A lot of towers get called out for water recovery, but we get in over our heads. And the pun is intended, because while we think the water environment isn't dangerous, it really is. And that's the thing that I need everyone to understand. Would you go into that house? Think about it. Would you run into that house? Fully engulfed in flames, shooting out, and the fire department is just arriving now when this happened. Think before you act. If you were going to go into that house, would you have a plan of action? If you didn't have a plan of action, doing nothing would probably be the best plan. Are you properly trained to assist or to go into that house? Think about this question. If you were going to go into that house, are you ready and willing to die today? Do you have proper training and proper equipment to go into that house? What is the worst thing that could happen if you did nothing? And what's the worst thing that could happen if you tried? What are the dangers of going into that house? What should you wear? Should you have something to protect your skin? Something to protect your lungs for breathing? What kind of training should you have? Every man and woman on every fire company has hundreds of hours of training before they're allowed to operate a hose or before they're allowed to enter a house. So think about those types of things. Now, if you were this guy and had all the right equipment, you had a bottle of air, a mask, proper gear, now you might consider entering that house if you had the right training to go along with the proper equipment. So, the right equipment, the right training, the right plan, and the next thing, the right backup. And we don't often think about that in our industry, but what is the right backup? Who is the right person or right people to back us up if we're going to engage in this type of risky endeavor? So what could you do with all those things in place? All right? When I dive, and I've been diving for 26 years now for our sheriff department, and we have two modes of operation. We have rescue mode, where a life is on the line, where we actually have the chance to save a life. Then we have recovery mode, which means we've either lost a life and there's no reclaiming it, or we're just recovering something that we're going to bring back, whether it's remains, whether it's a vehicle, whether it's a boat, or something from the water. In my 26 years, I've had 2 successful rescues in 26 years. I average about 10 bodies every year. So, the chances of a rescue are very, very slim. And the chances of those happening are also very, very slim. So when you think about what the risks are, what's the risk to your life and to your property if you're going to enter the water? You need to think about that before you do any water-related jobs. What's the risk to you personally, and what's the risk to your family and employees? Are you committing an employee to the water? Are you considering the risk to his or her life and their family? What happens if they die? Who's going to take care of that family? The water is a very, very dangerous environment that people totally underestimate. What are the risks and hazards to your equipment? You start running wire cable into the water and don't take care of it properly, it will fail prematurely. So if you start using it in a method or a manner that it's not planned for, and you're starting to use it continuously for things like this, you need to think about, how are we taking care of our equipment? If we're using recovery straps or nylon straps or poly straps underwater, are we properly taking care of those? So what's the risk to our equipment? Will it get moldy or mildewed? Will it be destroyed? Will it prematurely rust? What are the risks to your insurance carriers? A lot of people in the towing industry get involved casually in water-related recoveries, but they don't understand what the risks are, who's at risk, and more importantly, whose insurance is at risk. Because if you have a casual diver that says, oh, I can go in and pull that out, and you don't know all the rules that are going to govern that, and he gets hurt or injured, It could be totally on you and your insurance carrier. You need to understand, for your specific circumstances, who's going to bear that risk. What are the risks to bystanders and Samaritans that might just be around if you don't know or aren't properly equipped or properly trained to do the job that you're going to take on? And the last thing is, will the things that I do today make that situation worse? How many times have you gone to a job where if they would have called you earlier, it would have been a lot better? I remember when I was a little kid, my mother decided she was tired of paying the barber 50 cents for a haircut, so she went and bought a set of clippers. And the first pass over my head with the clippers, I was screaming, and we went to the barber, and the barber said, "So much for the 50-cent haircut," you know. He had to repair the damage that my mother had done to my hair, all right? So think about, what kind of things are we going to do that might make the situation worse when we talk about water recovery. Rescue versus recovery. Is there urgency? Is there life at risk? Or is it just property? All right? Can we save a life, or are we just recovering or saving property? Again, we have to put this in perspective. Will we put more lives at risk unnecessarily? How often is it that a would-be rescuer is the one that has to get rescued? That happens very, very frequently. The helper causes more problem. So we need to think about that. Offensive actions and defensive actions. Are we doing something proactively, or are we just doing something to protect? We have to decide, can we do this? What do we need to do? Can we wait and hold off until more trained personnel with proper equipment are on the scene to do the task that is before us? That's the question. And then we talk. Why all the talk about fire? Fire and water are not so different. We need both of them to survive in our daily lives. Fire and water take lives every day. They kill people. We don't respect the dangers that water poses like we respect those of fire. And I challenge every one of you, you're going to jump into the swimming pool, you're going to jump into the ocean, you're going to jump into the Gulf or wherever you might be staying, and you're not afraid of water that way. But you're afraid of fire. None of you would jump into that burning building. But they will both kill you just the same. So how do we get into this water rescue, water recovery? We all get called to remove vehicles that have gone off into a river, gone off into a creek, into a pond, into a lake, into a golf course pond. All of these things happen. We all get those called. Rarely will a tower be called to be involved in a water rescue. It's very, very rare that you may be called because someone's life's in jeopardy during a rescue operation. In the U.S., every one of these operations is governed by OSHA 29 CFR 1910 subpart T. It's the governing rules for all water operations and all diving operations. So if someone is putting a scuba tank on and going into the water and hooking up a car or a snowmobile or a quad runner or a golf cart or anything else, you are governed by 29 CFR 1910 subpart T. The only exemption to that is search and rescue related public safety diving by or under the control of government agency. Now some people say, well, the fireman or the police or the dive team always hooks up a car for me. Their exemption stops as soon as the body is removed from the vehicle. Once the emergency is gone, the exemption for them disappears. I've been a public safety diver for our sheriff department for over 20 years. Occasionally, we do things unrelated to rescue work. We dive for handguns, we dive for safes and evidence of crimes. Every time we dive in one of those, we have to follow 29 CFR 1910T. And there's a whole list of rules, and I'll summarize the important ones, but those rules govern your actions. And if you're there and your towing truck is there or your equipment's there and being utilized, people are going to come to you And if something goes wrong, as soon as there's a fatality, OSHA will be there. And they're going to come to you because if that vehicle's being recovered, you're in charge of that part of the scene. And if they're hooking up for you, they've become your employee. Even though you may say they're an independent contractor, even though he works for the sheriff department, or even though he's a diver for the fire department, you have bought that liability. And that's why I said earlier, what is the risk to your insurance carrier? Many people don't understand that that risk transfers to you as soon as you have them do work for you. This is at a lake. It's a pond that they're working on. And what you really can see right here, tire tracks. Is it a rescue or recovery? Right now, we don't know. In the northern part of the United States, a person, and in Manitoba, anywhere in Canada, you're not considered dead until you're warm and dead. So if you get into the water and you get submerged and the water temperature is below 70 degrees, survival times are up to an hour and a half for people submerged in water with successful resuscitation. So you're not considered dead unless you're warm and dead in the hospital. So when we do something like this, we look at it and we don't know when the vehicle went in, but this was a rescue. I was the first diver on scene and I responded. When we first do that, I found the vehicle in the water and I searched the vehicle and no one was there. So we stopped what we were doing. We went from our rescue operation to a recovery operation. When I first went in the water, I didn't have a safety diver. Why? I was exempt. I didn't have to have a safety diver. But when I start my recovery operation, I have to have a safety diver. So we changed the rules as we evolved the scene. That's exactly right. I turned my hat around. All right? Some simple facts about water. The average human body has between 55 to 75% water by weight. All right? I probably have a little bit more based on what I drank last night, but that's probably about the average. The other thing that affects us underwater is that at sea level, the ambient air pressure is 4.7 pounds per square inch. Now, what you think about is if you marked out 1 little square inch on your body, there's 14 pounds of air from the column of air all the way from the stratosphere all the way down that's pushing on your skin. That's the weight of all the air that's pushing down on you. However, when you go into the water, every 33 feet, that pressure doubles. And you're breathing air under pressure as well. When you're breathing ambient air right now, 20.8% of the air and the volume in this room is oxygen. The rest is nitrogen and some mixed gases. The water has less than 2% oxygen. So as humans, we're not able to extract water or oxygen from the water. Dolphins, whales, seals, otters, humans, we all require breathing air. Okay? None of us can breathe underwater. Some mammals can hold their breath for a long period of time, and some, like us, only minutes. All right? Rare cases, humans, long breath holds, 8 to 10 minutes is considered long. The world record for a human breath hold is 17 minutes. Okay? The average person can really only do about a minute before you start to panic. And what happens is, in the back of your neck, there's a thing in there that controls your bodily functions, and when it senses that there's CO2 building up, you get this urgent desire to breathe. All right? And whether you're underwater or not, that's going to be the urgent desire to breathe. So this is one of the primary dangers of water. It's unforgiving. If you're underwater and can't breathe, this is where mistakes are made. Many, many people get killed by thinking that they can do something. So if we're going to work in and about the water, what do we need to know? Water is dangerous at any depth. And you might think, well, this car's only in 2 feet of water. It's not a big deal. I can reach underneath and I can hook it up. I can push my face underwater for just a little bit of time and I can reach under and I can hook it up. But what happens if my arm gets caught and I can't pull my arm back out, and therefore I can't get my head back out of the water to breathe? I will be just as dead if I was down 100 feet as if my face is this far below the water. Okay? So, we must be properly trained to work in and around the water. We have to respect water and its powers and its dangers. And you have to have the right tools for the job. Our rule for the Sheriff Department is no one is allowed within 50 feet of the water on an operation unless you have a personal flotation device on or a life jacket. The best thing about that is it keeps the bosses away because they don't want to put these ugly orange life jackets on. But the real rule is that if somebody falls in, we don't have to rescue them. They can stay in the water and they can help themselves while we're doing the other things that we have to do. The first picture, polluted water. I dive in there 4 times a year. They're big impellers, it's a wastewater treatment pond, and I'm in there for about 10 to 15 minutes. They pay me a lot of money per minute to go in and do what I do 4 times a year. But I'm fully encapsulated. I wear a full body suit. I have a full face mask. We have a full decontamination set up, and we test the water before we dive it. All right? Knowing what we're up against is critically important. And what I say about polluted water that a lot of people don't think about, that tremendous amount of people get exposed to, golf course water. Pesticides, herbicides, fertilizers that run off that are in these small golf course ponds get intensely concentrated amounts of these chemicals. And you can get severe chemical burns to your face if you don't wear proper protection, to your hands and extremities, any exposed skin. I've seen guys go in to get a golf cart and, I'm just going to go in a swim trunks and a mask. And they come out and 3 or 4 days later their skin is fiery red because they weren't protecting themselves from the dangers of that polluted water. But they don't think about that golf course water being that polluted. If you're in a river or a beach area or some other area where there's contamination, or possibly even a wastewater treatment plant, downstream from those things, they might be discharging hazardous water. In the case of the floods after Katrina, the water, the putrid, fetid water that was all around Louisiana, all over, was very, very dangerous to people. Huge, huge factories of breeding ground for bacteria and contamination. The other dangers of water, hypothermia. We dive a lot. This is one of our dives in Michigan, and we actually cut holes through the ice to get snowmobiles and things like that out. But hypothermia is a very real danger. Current and moving water. Okay? This is an incredibly fast rapids. It comes right off of a Lowhead Dam. Lowhead Dam is where the water is coming over top of the dam, and then there's a boil at the bottom, so there's a huge water flow there. Notice that this guy doesn't have a tank on. The water is very shallow, but it's also very, very dangerous. Thinking about hooking up a car in swift-moving water, it can be very, very dangerous. Drowning. This is a plane that's upside down in the water. It was a seaplane that was attempting to land, and those are his pontoons floating upside down. The pilot was still in there. Okay? He had floated out there for 3 or 4 hours because they thought it was just a little catamaran that was upside down. So what are the dangers? Shallow, swift water kills a lot of people. 2 or 3 feet of moving water has tremendous, tremendous force on your body. Still polluted waters, the chemical and biological agents that may be there, the bacteria that grows in warm waters, or in, like you said, cesspits, or where there's, maybe human waste or something like that, or animal waste runoff from farms. Hidden hazards underwater, stumps, trees, rebar, concrete, anywhere around a bridge. If there's been reconstruction or work on the bridge, there's all sorts of debris off bridges. Overhead obstructions and entrapment, and ice diving. One of the most scariest times of my life was being trapped underwater for about 5 minutes under the ice in swift-moving water and not having the ability to move and help myself. And it was probably the closest I've come to dying. And it was a very, very life-changing event for me. Sudden changes in water, flash flooding. That can happen very, very rapidly. People from California know, you get those rains, torrential rains, and it comes down the valley, and all of a sudden, you could have a dry lake or a dry river bed, and it's all of a sudden full. West Virginia, the rivers through West Virginia where they run the rafts and stuff like that. I've been on those rivers when they're 28 feet higher than normal level. Think about that, 28 feet higher than their normal average level. And why? When the rainy season comes. Hypothermia. Water cools your body 25 times faster than air. To put that in perspective, you could take all your clothes off, you could stand outside in Michigan at 0 degrees, and you could live for about 48 or more hours before your body is going to succumb to the effects of hypothermia. If you jump in the water, you're going to be unable to help yourself within 15 to 20 minutes. That's how much faster you're going to be incapacitated in cold water. Zero visibility. This is something that we experience a lot. Most of our rivers have no visibility. The polluted water I dive in has no visibility, so it's all working by hand and by feel. And then the other thing is entanglement, ropes, wires, fishing nets, old cast-off things, especially around bridges or other things, other work areas, and the oceans. Again, you think about like the Keys diving and stuff. You talk about, all the old bridges and all the old concrete, and they're incredibly dangerous. So what do we do to protect ourselves in the water? The first thing we do is we're going to wear a PFD, have a personal flotation device to make sure that we're going to stay on the surface of the water. If we're working on the surface of the water, we're going to either wear an immersion suit or some type of exposure suit that is going to protect us from the environment. All right? Might be a wetsuit where water acts as an insulator, or a dry suit which fully encapsulates your body and keeps you dry, as well as protecting your skin surfaces. A mask and a snorkel for shallow work, and scuba, self-contained underwater breathing apparatus when you're going to submerge your head under the water to do a hookup or to search for something. And then what else are we going to do? We're going to have a tender, a surface support, and a backup diver. We do not do any operations at all unless we have a diver, a safety diver, and a tender. What should we have in terms of training and certification? OSHA requires that everyone on the scene that's working has to have basic CPR and first aid. You have to have basic swimming and drown-proofing survival skills. There must be a diver, a tender, and a line tender for each person in the water or going in the water. Okay? You may or may not need a sonar technician depending on what you're doing if it's zero visibility. Basic scuba or advanced scuba. Are you a rescue diver, or do you need to know more about underwater salvage and rigging? Are you working off a barge, or are you working off the bridge deck or the ground? How are you determining what you're going to do? And the last thing is that when you add under the ice diving or confined diving, down in Florida it might be like cave diving, all right? Those types of things are all OSHA confined space entry. And those have a whole new set of rules. So you have to think about that. If you're going to expose someone to those, you're going to be responsible if something happens. So what? PFD for flotation, exposure suit for thermal and pollution protection, all right? Tether lines for assistance in guiding somebody in zero visibility water and or helping them in a current. And the tender has to monitor the worker's physical condition and the environmental conditions. When I'm below the surface, I can't see if there's another boat coming that may endanger my life, but that tender has to be my eyes and ears on the surface. If there's a storm coming, he has to be the one, or she has to be the one that gets me out of the water safely. So that tender is responsible for my life when I'm under the water. So here's the scene. We are just working near the water. What we've got, this is our wastewater ponds, and they're moving one of these large floating aeration pumps on a knuckle boom crane, and when they swing it over, they get it going too far and it flips their truck over. They were too close and didn't plan well. So what are we going to do for the hookup? I'm out here on the end, I'm going to hook up. I do not have to get into the water. I'm going to do what we would do on the highway, like a single lane uprighting, but instead I'm going to go up to the high part here in the knuckle of the boom, and I'm putting a strap on. But what do I have? I have my PFD, Why? Because I'm on the water side of this incident. All right? If I fall in and hit myself in the head and I knock myself out, they can easily grab me and drag me back out. But if I don't have that on and I hit my head and I go down, they could lose me. So I want to protect myself and do a safe hookup. So now what we're going to do is we're going to recover this. We're winching it back up. You can see the impeller coming up. We're going to pull it up, and the truck is out and ready to go. A simple water-related recovery, but we did the right things. All right, we protected the people that were exposing themselves to the risk of the water, and that's wearing the PFD. The same way you would wear gloves to protect your hands, a uniform to protect your body. You think about what are we doing around the water. That water is just as dangerous, especially when things go wrong. It can become very, very dangerous. Now we have two different scenes here. These are both non-diving water recoveries. Do you have to have a diver? Do you need a diver? Here we have a vehicle that's submerged. You can see just the top of it. But what are we doing? We have two people in suits, firemen. This was a boater. And what they're doing is they're just going to put a strap right through the roof to drag it in. The vehicle's already junk. You don't need to put a diver under the water to save the vehicle. It's already a total loss. So that's what we're going to do. In this case, we've got really swift-moving water here. And what I'm doing, this is a really nice 1967 Camaro, or was really nice. And they went off an embankment. But what I'm doing here is I'm taking a strap and I'm putting a strap around the wheel. Now, if I would have had to dive, I would have gotten a tank on, I would have had a tender, and more things going on. In this case, I've got a suit on and just a PFD, and I'm just hooking up around the tire with just a loop and a lasso. And it works very, very well. Again, you have to consider, what are we doing? We're just recovering some debris. Now, tended non-diving in polluted water. This, my favorite septic ponds, okay? This is a tanker that was coming, and he came off this dike. This is a dike that runs along the pond, and he tried to make a turn, and he turned a little too short. He's fully loaded, and we're working on this dike right here. This dike is 20 foot tall. So we have a very narrow dike that we have to flip this truck and trailer over. So we're offloading it first. I took the valve off the bottom, and as soon as he started to take this stuff out, it started to float because it's like a bathtub. So we brought it in and we flipped it over. But again, what we have is I've got my exposure suit on. I have a tending line. So if I fall in, they can pull me out and they can help me. All right? Do I need a life jacket on in this case? No, because this suit, when I have it on, is considered a PFD. It's a cold water working or immersion suit. And obviously this is in January, so it's a cold weather, but I'm working and it's a great job and everything's working good. The other people that are all around that are working, you can see everybody's got their hard hat and appropriate PPE on, personal protective equipment. So I need that same thing when I get into the water. Now, again, a non-diving recovery hookup. We expose our people, and I'm sure you have in Manitoba, you've reached into cold water before. How do you hook up to the front of this truck? The water's 3.5, 4 feet deep. He's got an exposure or an immersion suit on, and he's hooking up to the front pin of the tractor and pulling it out. Again, we've done the right thing for our customer, and we've protected our employer or our employee. We're working safely in a harsh environment. These guys, we carry these suits in our trucks. They have them, they're readily available, and they're properly trained to use them. I don't want my people hurt. I want to be able to take care of that customer when we get there. So, protecting hypothermia, we're safely working in a very, very harsh environment. That particular day, the wind chill was about 25 below zero and unbelievably cold. Unbelievably cold. There was a large field and the wind was just whipping. But it was a great job for us. So for dive operations, if you're going to commit a diver, what do you need? You need a primary diver, number one. You need a safety or rescue diver or a backup diver for all operations. There are no operations that you're going to do that are going to be exempt for you as a company. If you are a rescue driver, you may have some exempt operations, but as a tow company, you will never have an OSHA exempt dive. Okay? You have to have a diver tender, a tender for the safety diver. All of these people have to be properly trained. And you need somebody else that oversees the whole thing, your dive operations manager, and they're going to be the one responsible for the entire operation. Okay? What are the requirements to put a diver in? You have to have good health. Unlike a DOT physical, a diver has to have a physical every year. So if you think, you know, I'm going to get my buddy who dives and I'm going to have him hook up this car, okay? He has to have a dive physical before he goes in the water for you. If not, and he gets hurt, OSHA, boom, you're liable. Okay? Incredibly important. Not only do you have to have a physical, but when you get old and fat like me, you have to have a physical every year if you're over 35 years old. Once you hit 35, every year you have to have a pulmonary test and you have to have an EKG. So just like pilots, where the requirements as you get older get more stringent, for divers they get more stringent as you get older as well. So you have to be in good physical health and able to do the job because it's very strenuous underwater, more so than on the land. The other thing you have to do is properly train all the personnel that are on your job site. Everybody, when we talked about the CPR and those types of things, everybody has to have the proper training. Your diver has to be properly trained and certified. Your tenders have to be properly trained and certified. Okay? Your dive operations supervisor has to know everybody's job there and what's going on. You have to have an emergency action plan. If something goes wrong, what do you do? Call the Coast Guard, call 911. You need to know where the nearest hyperbaric chamber is, and you need to have an evac plan for that hyperbaric chamber for an injured diver. And that has to all be in writing before you start your job. You have to have that. And that's why I say, you know, a lot of guys in the towing industry, hey, can you come pull this car out of the pond? Can you come pull my tractor out of the lake? Can you come do this for me? We do it every day, but we don't know the risks that we're exposing ourselves to when we do that because we don't understand what we're going to do. There isn't any property that's worth dying for. No amount of gold in the bottom of the ocean in the Titanic is worth dying for, or any other wreck. And no vehicle that you're going to pull out is worth dying for. So think about that, the risk versus the reward. Are you getting properly paid and compensated for what you're doing? So if you're going to do those jobs, get paid properly. The other thing is, you have to have the diver, the safety diver, and the tender. And if, as you can see right here, we have a diver out here. This is his tending line. We have a diver. Have another diver in the water and another diver in the water. There's two more safety divers sitting up there ready to go. This is the pair that just got done. So you have to have diver, safety diver, tender every time somebody's underwater. You have to have that. And the only exemption is in an emergency. So when we have a diver down and we're doing these operations, in this case, you can see we're using a lift bag. We've got some containment booms around the boat to catch the gasoline. We're going to pick the boat out. This guy was running down at night, hit a stump in the river, and, you know, we're picking the boat up. Beautiful textbook job. Everything went incredibly well, and we got paid. And most importantly, we did it safely, and we had fun. All right? These are different jobs. We don't get a lot of them. We get maybe 20, 30 of them a year out of the 30 or 40,000 tows we do every year. This is the fun stuff. But it can also be the more deadly stuff because we don't do it every day. It's not stuff that we practice over and over and over again, but it's stuff we need to make sure that we're trained for. So we've got our environmental containment. We're using lift bags, a couple of straps, pick the boat up, and everybody goes home safe and happy, except the operator of the boat. Now, searching where there's no visible vehicle or no path leading in. In this case, we had a vehicle go in. We had no idea where it was going to go. The river ice was breaking up in the spring. It's moving rapidly downstream. The average vehicle will float anywhere from 30 or 40 seconds up to several minutes before it sinks, and they'll be carried downstream with the current. We knew the vehicle went in. We knew we had 2 people in the vehicle. We just didn't know how far it went before it sank. So those are the things. You know, it went 100 feet out, and then it went 20 feet down, but we didn't know how far it went downstream. So it took quite a while to search and find it. This is a sonar, and it's a relatively inexpensive one, and we used it in a zero visibility. And what we have right here and right here is this. And you can see we go from about 27 feet right here up to about 20, then up to about 10, and then 7, and then down. Do you know what that is? It's a D9 bulldozer that went off an embankment at a gravel pit. All right? We knew about where it was, but we didn't know exactly where it was. All right? So what did we do? We got on the boat and we started running our sonar sweeps. And then all of a sudden, lo and behold, we see it on the sonar, we see this big mark, and then we marked it, and then you can put a diver down, or we have underwater video cameras we drop down, and you know, it works incredibly well. We're using technology to be safer and not commit divers when we don't have to. A lot of the searches we do for vehicles now will use sonar technology instead of divers, and it saves a lot of time and a lot of energy. Other big dangers, night diving operations. If you think that it's difficult to do an operation during the day, the night complicates it. This was the plane that had flipped over, and you can see the pontoons of the float plane. There's the main body of the float plane, the fuselage and empennage sections there of the float plane. And we've already taken the pilot out. We flipped the plane over. We flipped it vertical in the water, and then we floated it over to a dock, and when we loaded it on a trailer on the dock. Again, it was a great job. We had fun. But you know what the number one thing is we had to do before we touched that plane? We had to get permission from the NTSB. The FAA controls all plane accidents. The fire chief says, go get it. Said, did you call the FAA? Do you have permission? No. We can't touch that plane. It's a fatality. It's a plane crash. We have no legal authority, and you don't have legal authority, because if we're sure that guy's dead and he was underwater for at least 4 hours, we know there's no chance of survival. We can't touch that plane until we get clearance. So you have to call the FAA for any water-related incidents. Under ice operations, the guy on the left is going and doing a water entry out of a crane bucket and doing repairs on the barge where the bridge was. They accidentally punched holes in the side of the barge. So we're doing barge repairs that day. Here we're fishing out a snowmobile. And we get that a lot, maybe a dozen or so times a year. And we go out on the ice and fish out snowmobiles. A lot of guys in the northern climates get to go out and get cars and things that go out on the ice. And we do those occasionally, but most of ours are snowmobiles and quad runners. So thinking about water safety, it's up to you. There isn't anything that you're going to recover that's worth dying for. All right? There isn't anything worth recovering that you're going to risk injuring an employee for. Always think and make your plan first before you do these. There is no rush to recover something from the water. There's never any rush. So think and plan first. Make sure that your people are properly trained, have proper equipment, and a proper plan. And then if everything goes to pot, what is our backup plan? Do we have our backup divers? Do we have our people in place? Do we know where the nearest helicopter is for an emergency evac? Do we know where the nearest hyperbaric chamber is? All of those things have to be thought of, written down, and everybody needs to know those before that operation starts. So what we want to do is we want to have a safe and successful recovery and make sure that everyone goes home, has a good time, and doesn't get in over their head when you go underwater. Thank you very much. Any questions?